It's plastic surgery. No surgery for that.
What are you trying to say?
No, it's just funny. I thought it was a funny laugh.
Well, so this one's been natural.
Horrible.
Oh, that's your
Hey, I'll have to call you back a little later, okay?
All right, folks, welcome to Hazel Park Public Library. I know some of you may be lost, but we are still in Hazel Park, and this is in fact a public library that you came to. The library is very honored because we have speaking to us a woman who has had a chance to find out what the worst humanity could offer and managed to survive. So please, a round of applause for Miss Irene Miller.
Projector. I think the thing is asleep.
sleeping.
Ah,
Is it a computer? Nothing's here. Oh, there you go.
time is slow on the internet. They only perceive as fast.
I am one of the 10% of Jewish children who survived the Holocaust. Most of them gone by now. Though I can tell you only about my survival journey, but those of us fortunate to be left alive become also the voices of those who didn't live to tell the story. This is what I looked like when Nazis attacked Poland. I was 5, 6 years old. My immediate family was made up of 4. Here is my older sister and I. She is 8 and I am 3, and our parents. I was born and lived in Warsaw until Nazis attacked the city. When Nazis attacked Poland, it seems to me that Warsaw was under siege for a few weeks. Day and night, bombs were falling. We lived on the top floor of an apartment building, which was the most vulnerable place because bombs were falling through the roof ceilings and into the homes. So with the cooperation of friends who lived on the second floor, we moved in with them. But even there, it wasn't safe from the bombs. One night, the bomb fell into that apartment, exploded by the door, leaving the only way out was through the window, and that was second floor. My father, who was a very tall man, knocked out the window and jumped, and he said we have to follow him quickly before the whole place gets engulfed in flames. When my turn came, I stood on the windowsill and looked down. It seemed so far down. I was so scared I couldn't move. My mother pushed me out the window. Somehow my father did not catch me, and I fell on a pile of glass, cutting my arms and legs. When the family was down, my mother picked me up, carried me to a bomb shelter, and there she was pulling out shards of glass out of my limbs. These running to bomb shelters occurred over and over, particularly at night. At some point, we lost the water. A bomb severed the water pipes, and the only way we could get at least drinking water is running down the street when there was still a functioning faucet and filling containers. I remember where I was when Nazis entered Warsaw. I was in our own apartment. I don't remember it was the 4th or the 5th floor, but I was too high up to see the faces of the Nazi soldiers. They were filling the width of the streets, 10, 15 abreast. But strangely, I could see a reflection of shining boots pounding and pounding the pavement. You know how many years have passed since then? When I talk in schools, I tell them it's not just before their parents were born, but even before their grandparents were born. Yet, there are still some sounds, some smells, aromas, to which I still now react emotionally. One such sound, a low-flying plane. Another one is a rhythmic pounding on a hard surface. I hear it and I tighten up. My parents felt that being Jewish, and my father was the leader of the labor union in the Jewish division. As such, they were liberal people. They felt that they would be the first one to be persecuted by the Nazis. So sometimes during the winter of 39 or 40, they sold the lease to our apartment, hired a Polish guide to smuggle us across the border to the Soviet Union. On one side, Poland borders with the Soviet Union. Why to go there? Because at that time, the Nazis were not there yet. As you probably know, later during the war, they attacked the Soviet Union as well. And why to smuggle us? Because the borders were closed and the Nazis would, and the Soviets would not allow anyone to enter. I remember the last leg of that journey trying to cross the border. It was in the middle of the night, extremely cold. We were wearing layers and layers of clothing to keep warm and also to minimize under luggage. We were sitting inside the wagon of plane, over our faces, over our heads, and over all that an old blanket. So should a Nazi soldier come across that wagon, he would not be able to see that there are people in it. At some point, this man stopped, let us off in an area that was surrounded by tall trees. You couldn't see what's beyond it. He told us that we had crossed already the border and pointed where in the morning we were to take the train towards the city my parents were headed for the other store. We huddled up for the remainder of the night. And when we woke up in the morning and left that secluded area, we saw fields with thousands of people laying on the snow, leaning against bags, suitcases. This man did not take us across the border. He left us on the no man's land. My parents didn't want to go back to Poland, of course. My mother pulled out a blanket, spread it over the snow among people. People were sitting very close, one next to the other. She also pulled out a down comforter, commonly used in winter in Europe. And this place in an open field in winter became my home for about 6 weeks. My mother would repeat over and over, move, move, if you move, you're not going to be that cold. I moved as much as I could, and when I couldn't anymore, I would crawl under the cover. At some point, my feet got crossed. I had open wounds, was unable to wear my shoes. So my mother took a garment of hers, wrapped my feet in rags, and I shuffled around as well as I could. The only food we were able to buy was that which the peasant women from nearby villages would come after sundown, bring bread, boiled potatoes, sometimes farmer cheese, and charge exorbitant prices. The only fluid we had for drinking is melting snow. There were woods in the areas. People were making fires to warm themselves and to melt the snow for drinking. Though I was a little girl as you saw me there, I remember many scenes starting with the no man's land. But two images from that period are still vivid in my mind. I woke up one night and there was a strange man next to me under the covers. I tried to push him out, but apparently I fell asleep. And when I woke up in the morning, the man next to me was dead. People were dying from disease, from starvation, from exposure. And now the peasant women were also bringing shovels for them. And the young men buried the dead in shallow grave. The other scene, I was standing with my mother by a fire trying to warm myself. And a young woman approached holding the baby in her arms, wrapped in blankets. And people assumed she wanted to warm herself and her child. So they parted, letting her come closer to the fire. But as she did so, a man looked into her arms and said, "Lady, your baby doesn't need warming anymore. The baby was dead." The man took that dead baby out of the mother's arms and proceeded where the Soviet soldiers were protecting the borders. He laid it in front of one of the guards, and the crowd started shouting, "Let us in, let us in. See, we are dying one by one." And that guard didn't say a thing, just kicked the baby back into the crowd. And like all others, it was probably buried there. My parents concluded that they had to take some drastic steps, and we are not going to survive seeing people dying daily. One night, my father smuggled himself across the border. On the Soviet side, he bribed an official to give him a letter permitting the family to cross the border. But when he returned with that letter said that he may take his children, and the guards would not let my mom go. Our parents decided that my father should take my sister and myself to safety and see what he can do thereafter to bring over mom. We walked a whole night in the forest, and for me the pain was extreme. The open wounds on my feet were wrapped in soft cracks, and the earth was frozen and hard. But eventually we made it to the city Białystok. Around that city were clusters of Jews from Poland. We ended up in one cluster. It was a wooded area with a lot of scattered little cabins. No furniture of any kind, a few families on the floor in a small cabin. But after being for 6 weeks in an open field, laying on a wooden floor with a roof over my head, I probably felt like a queen in a palace. My father had no more money left, and also travel in the Soviet Union at that time was forbidden. Only those who were big dignitaries or had a lot of money to bribe an official would be able to get a ticket and permission to travel. So my father tried to reach the no man's land on the rooftops of trains. He was caught by the police, put in jail for a while, let out, and kept on repeating it over and over. During all the time when our father was gone, my sister and I were left alone. Here and there, a caring person offered us a meal, but I don't remember what and how we were able to eat beside them. Eventually, our father made it to the no man's land, but by the time he got there, no one was there anymore. The Nazis came with all the people, including my mother, put them on train in direction to Poland and Germany. For a little girl to think that she might never see her mama again was very difficult to understand and to accept. Our father found some work in the city, was commuting daily by train. My sister and I were left alone, he, my little mama, and we managed as well as we could. Days went by, weeks went by, maybe one more. Nothing unusual happened. Then one day, we were standing over a low basin, a basin propped up on a low stool, trying to do the family laundry. What did I know, a little kid, how to do laundry? I spilled it on myself and on the floor. My knuckles got bloody. My sister was angry. I was upset. In the midst of all the tension, the door to our cabin opened and our mother walked. You can imagine my enormous joy and excitement, but also confusion. I didn't know whether she was alive. It seemed to me that it has been so long since I last saw her, and suddenly she showed up. It took me enormous lengths of time to trust that my mama will not disappear one day. Maybe just when she showed up, she will vanish. And I would get up many times at night just to touch his mama here. Well, we were together now. We were happy. That was the main thing. We were together. And also whatever my father was earning in the city was enough to buy food. But the joy did not last for very long. We started hearing that Soviet soldiers were coming in the middle of the night and taking away all the young men. And no one knew what happened to these men. and my father then was a young man. One day there was a rumor that our cluster was scheduled for such a raid. So my mother took the train to the city where Dad worked to warn him not to come back until he hears from her. But she missed the last train that night coming to us. And that night, when my sister and I were alone, Soviet soldiers kicked in the door of the cabin. They said, "Get your stuff." And they marched us to a train station where there was a long line of cattle cars. And they shoved in as many people in each of those boxes as they could. And my sister and I cried and cried that we are not going to go without our parents. And those soldiers kept on telling us lies and lies. When the platform was almost empty of people, we saw from a distance a small truck in our parents' time. Was I happy to see them? I never asked, never found out how they heard about the raid, how they found transportation. All it mattered to me, they were there. And as soon as they were there, they shoved us in one of those box cars. So many people in each of them that there was no room for anyone to stretch themselves on the floor. People were leaning against boxes, banks, against the wall, against one another, whatever they could. There were two sliding doors that would pull the doors together, and across them on the outside, a heavy metal bar to hold the doors in place. When the doors were pulled, we could hardly see. There was no window. The only light was that which was coming between the cracks of the boards. Once a day, soldiers walked around with buckets of soup, and we were given each a cup of soup. On the days when we were lucky, we got with it a little piece of bread, but those lucky days were far apart. Most of the time, a cup of soup was the food for the day. Once a day, soldier walked around and let everyone out simultaneously under the train to the beach. It doesn't take very long to forget about the idea of privacy. Do what you have to do. People were extremely hungry. Many were sick, and everyone scared and anxious, not understanding why the soldiers picked us up, where they're taking, and what they will do with us. We were on that train somewhere between 6 and 8 weeks, and then through additional means of transportation, delivered to a labor camp in the Siberian taiga. Taiga is a dense forest covering the northern part of Russia. Our little houses were placed right against the forest. Bears would come up to the door fronts. At night, we heard Siberian wolves howling, and we were scared. We heard stories about wolves attacking people at night, that is in the dark. And in Siberia, in wintertime, there are only about 3 hours of daylight, and the rest is dark like night. And in the summer, it's reverse. Everyone had to work, including my older sister, who was by then maybe 11, maybe 12. The main work was a cement factory, and some young men were sent to further clear the forest. Temperature there would drop to below 50 minus. If a bird for some reason didn't fly away in time, it would freeze to the tree like a lump of ice. When you were outside, with the slightest portion of your skin exposed, it will get frostbitten within a minute or two. And for me, a kid that size, getting out in the winter most of the time was almost impossible because the snow was taller than I was. I did not talk to my children about my Holocaust experiences. I did not talk to anyone about it until a few years ago. There were people who worked with me for many years, and all they knew is that I was born in Europe. But my youngest child kept on asking me, and apparently I told some bits and pieces. of her. Because in Naomi was her name, in Naomi's high school writing, I found reference to two situations in Siberia. There was one store, the governmental store. Rarely would you go there and find something that you needed for your daily life. But people would frequent the store just to see what do they happen to have there today. But no matter what they had, it was a ration. Everything was a ration, including bread. My mother sent me to the store once to get the family's ration of bread. The bread came in big, black, lumpy loaves sitting on the counter. The clerk would weigh what is the portion in our case for 4 people. And I told Naomi that I was giving the large piece, and with this a tiny, tiny little piece. And it took so much willpower for me to resist my desire eating the little piece of bread because I was extremely hungry. So Naomi said, if you were hungry, how come you didn't eat it? I told her this was the bread for the whole family. And we had to wait until Mama divided it and let us have it. But no sooner did I hand over the bread to my mother, took the little piece and put it in my mouth. At some other time, when it was my birthday, my mother said, let's pretend that there is no war. What kind of a present would you like for your birthday? And I told her a big loaf of bread and that I could eat as much of it as I want. And I saw tears flowing down her face, and I didn't know what did I do wrong to make my mama cry. We were extremely hungry. We were in Siberia somewhere between 2 and 2.5 years. And I remember only one day I wasn't hungry. And I remember that day very well. We were given a tiny little piece of land and we planted potatoes. And my mother said, on the day we harvest the potatoes, we will have one meal that I can eat as many potatoes as I want. On the day we brought the potatoes from the field, the store has fresh herring. So my mother got one herring, cut it into little pieces, and we baked the potatoes outdoor and ate them with herring. Oh, was that good? I don't remember how many potatoes I ate, but I remember a thought that stayed with me thereafter for a very, very long time. I thought when I grow up, maybe I'll be so lucky that I will become rich. Not a little bit rich, but very rich. Then I'll be able to eat potatoes every day. I thought that to eat potatoes every day, you have to be royalty or very rich. Well, I'm neither one nor the other, but I do eat potatoes. Not every day, but I eat potatoes. But no potato will ever taste as good as the one when I was so extremely hungry in Siberia. From Siberia, they shipped us to Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan then was the Southern Republic of the Soviet Union. Now it's an independent country. I am sure that my parents felt that going south to a warm climate, life will be easier, food will be more accessible. But while we were very hungry in Siberia, we were almost starving in Uzbekistan. We were placed in a very poor farming community. My parents were not given any land to cultivate, and there was no way of finding work. My father walked from farmer to farmer, willing to do any kind of work in exchange for food. Once in a while, he would get a day's work, but most of the time, not. There were long periods of time that we lived on boiled grass and leaves. My mother would go into the field, pick up things that were grown wildly green, primarily leaves, grass, boil it, drink it first herself to see how she reacted. If she was okay with it, she would give it to us as well. There was one period that we lived on broiled onion. Some farmer must have had a good crop of onions, And in exchange for some of my mother's clothing, she got a bag of onions. We all came down with malaria. A violent, devastating disease. You could see a person one day, he seems fine. A week or two later, he's gone. I said violent because I had malaria. Most of the time, I was probably not conscious because the fever was so elevated. But when I was, I remember screaming and screaming, my bones were breaking. No matter how many layers I had over me, I was shivering violently with such a cold that as a young child, I thought my bones were breaking. After recovering from malaria, I had difficulty walking. There were some Jews from Poland in Uzbekistan. I don't know who they were and how they were able to do it, but they established orphanages for Jewish children from Poland and would recruit not only orphans, but any Jewish child from Poland. And this was simply an attempt of saving the children from dying of starvation. One day, a man showed up in our village, talked to our parents. Next day, he came with a horse and buggy. Our mother told us we will go to a place where there will be other children. Food will be more available, and they, our parents, will visit when possible. It took us a few days in that buggy until we came to the village where the orphanage was housed. The orphanage was basically contained in one room, from one end of the wall to the other. Boards had been ripped off the floor, propped up on stack of bricks, and girls were laying tightly next to them, one next to the other, covered with old blankets, and their heads completely shaved. Across the room, the same arrangement for all. The caregivers shaved the children's heads because the sanitary conditions were horrible. I don't remember when and where I was able to take a bath or a shower. And they feared that under those conditions, the kids will come down with lice that spread diseases, and apparently lice nestle in hair. But we found out very quickly that lice nestle in all kinds of other places as well, because we were about 100 bald-headed kids and covered with those crawling little things, the lice. And lice make your skin burn so badly that you are ready to rip it off. I remember being bloody all over from that intense scratching. And you know the strange thing, you know how many years ago when all that happened? Yet, when I just think about the life, even before I talk about it, my head starts itching so badly that I want to take my 10 fingers and stretch. It lasts a few minutes and then it goes away. A few months after entering the orphanage, my father died. There was an epidemic of dysentery in the village they lived. No physician, no farm. My mother walked the whole night in search of penicillin to another community. I don't know whether she obtained it or not, but when she returned, my father was dead, buried in a communal grave. He didn't even know in which one. The war ended in 1945, but I stayed in the orphanage in Uzbekistan a few months later till 46. I don't know what was the reason we were unable to return sooner, but I had no other choice but to wait. During all the years of the war, extreme hunger to the point of almost starvation was a daily part of my life. There was a lot of loneliness, a lot of fear and anxiety, not knowing what will happen from day to day and not understanding what's going on. No radio, no newspaper, of course, no television. If the adults knew something, they didn't share it with us. I assume, believing that the less the children know, the better it is, but it worked for me the other way around. The less I knew, the more I was anxious and more speculative. But I tried to do everything possible to keep myself constructively involved. I learned to read myself quite young. Polish, because Polish was my childhood language. While in the Soviet Union, I learned how to read Russian and, of course, how to speak it. And I would read anything I could put my hands on in one language or the other. But my educational opportunities were extremely limited. The only place I was expressing what I thought and how I felt was in writing poetry. I was writing poetry since I was a young girl. My home here in Michigan was hit by a tornado in 1975. Half of the house was ripped off and blown away with it most of my belongings. A few years ago, I looked for a book I thought survived the tornado. And to my great surprise, not only did I find that book, but in that book, I found one notebook of my poems from the orphanage. You can imagine how yellow the paper is with age. I was afraid to touch it, that it would crumble in my hand, but it didn't. And by the way, I had a whole stack of poems, tightly written because paper was very precious, but only that notebook. Reading it as an adult surprises me that nothing in it indicates it had been written by a child. Nothing cute, nothing funny, just expressing longing for normal. How wonderful it would be to live in a small house just with my family, not 100 people in one room. How great it must be not to be hungry. And hunger for me, I translate it as my belly. How wonderful it must be. I'm sure I didn't remember how it was. And to see my aunts, uncles, and cousins. And to attend a school, a normal school. I was always such a curious child, wanting to know, wanting to understand. And poetically describing Poland. Poland for me was paradise on earth. But of course, I left Poland as a very young child. But when I returned to Poland with my orphan, nothing of what I hoped for or envisioned became reality. I spent another 5 years after the war in orphanages in Krakow. Anti-Semitism was still raging in Poland. Quite a lot of Jews were killed by Polish people after the war, particularly in small towns. The tiny, tiny Jewish community that was left alive tried to do everything possible for us, the children, to survive. The orphanage was for Jewish children, so was the school. The school was only in one room. There was a handful of us kids left alive, and that was in the city of Krakow. People of various ages in one room. That school took us once to what used to be a concentration or death camp. In the display room was a tall pile of shoes, men's shoes, women's shoes, little kid shoes, shoes of those who were sent to the gas chamber to die. There was a tall pile of hair. Women who had long hair, they cut their hair before sending them to death, and they used the hair for various purposes. There were lamps with shades made of human skin, soap made of human flesh. It took me an enormous length of time before I could take a bar of soap in my hand and not think of my aunts, uncles, and cousins. I told you that I don't remember if I mentioned my extended family in Poland numbered close to 100 members. Not a single one of them survived. For my mother, continue living in Poland, she felt like living on the graveyard of her brothers and sisters. She and my older sister, who was by then married, she married a boy from the orphanage. They decided that they cannot continue living in Poland. They have to leave. And the only place they were able to go was to Israel, but because the Israeli government was helping Holocaust survivors who wanted to immigrate. I didn't know anything about Israel. I was extremely eager to continue with my education. I would squeeze in 2 or 3 academic years in 1 year. Yeah. But the ruling in my orphanage was that once I reached the age of 17, I would have to leave and take care of myself. I did not know a single person in Poland or anywhere else outside of the orphanage was my world of people. Though I did not live with my mother and my sister, they were within a distance that I could periodically take public transportation, and apparently they provided some emotional support which I needed, because I did not have the courage to be left in Poland after they leave. So in 1950, I joined my mother to immigrate to Israel. Israel was a different chapter of my life with different challenges. I did not know anyone in Israel. I knew I would have to support myself and thought I would probably have to support my mother as well because she was a sick person. And I did not know the language spoken, which is Hebrew. But as you can see, I survived. I don't want to leave you with the feeling and the thought, here is this poor woman who had such a tough life, because I absolutely don't think of myself that way. Not only am I fortunate that I survived, but I am fortunate that I was able to create a meaningful life and significantly contribute to my community. Nothing comes down. This is what I looked like when I came to the United States. I was 21, I think, maybe 22 years old. I was married, had a little baby, did not know a word of English. That was the third country I was coming without knowing the spoken language. Soviet Union without Russian, Israel without Hebrew, United States without English. But fortunately, when I was young, I was picking up languages extremely fast. It didn't take me too long. I entered the University of Cincinnati. I lived in Cincinnati about 16, 17 years. I earned an undergraduate degree in psychology, then a master's in social psychology. A few years later, I entered Xavier University, also in Cincinnati, and I earned an MBA, which is a master in business administration with a major in hospital management. I had very rewarding work as a healthcare executive, including for a year, I served on an advisory committee in Washington, D.C., a committee that dealt with women, children, and drug addiction. They would fly me in once a month and so on. I am retired now, which means I work and I don't get paid. But I do things that are extremely important to me. My whole adult life, I tried to live by the Jewish ethical principle called in Hebrew tikkun olam. Tikkun olam literally means repairing the world. Implied in it is that we each have a responsibility to do everything we can to make this world a little better for everyone. How I do it is, first of all, how I relate to people in my life, my personal, professional, volunteer. I respect fully and equally every good human being. Doesn't matter what the color of their skin, what's their religion, where they came from, poor or rich. They're good human beings, they are welcome, and they have my full respect. I try to use my time and my skills to enrich the life of my community. One day I might meet you at the Detroit Institute of Art, our magnificent art museum. There I will talk to you about art and not about the Holocaust. I have been a docent helping people to understand art for more than 20 years. I am a mediator in court, which means I help people resolve conflict without having to appear before a judge, and this becomes legally binding. I am on the board of directors of the oldest civil rights organization in the United States called the American Jewish Committee. But the most important thing, my mission in life now, is to use my Holocaust experiences to promote tolerance and diversity. Acceptance and respect of diversity is now more needed than ever in my life since I came to the United States, because we see so much hate, so much violence, so much discrimination. Since the University of Michigan published my book, and you saw it, Bob, my companion there has the books, I have been invited all over the country to tell my story and to help people learn from it. Because what I told you is just a small segment, not just of my life, but what happened under the totalitarian Stalin regime and what happened under the brutal Hitler's era. And this is my website that right now my book is only available on my website or in Kindle on Amazon, irenemillerspeaker.com. This is probably the largest gathering where I have been in Indiana, 1,800 students and teachers. By now, if I look at the images, I don't even recognize. Bob there is excellent at that, but I'm not going to trouble to say, honey, where was that? I have been in many, many schools. I touched something wrong. Mary, I need assistance. Oh, I think I put my hand on something wrong. I'm used to having the remote, so I don't have to play around. A technician in the house? Yeah, probably put my hand on. Okay, been there. Anyway, oh, Mary, here she comes.
I'm coming, sorry.
Mary, I must put my hand somewhere in the oh, wait a minute. All she has to do is show up and yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll be careful with my I speak in middle schools and high schools because I feel that children younger than that are not ready for the story. But when I was in Boyne City, thank you. When I was in Boyne City, a fourth grade teacher asked me, would I please speak to her students because they studied immigration. Look at all those hands up, they had wonderful questions. I have been in many, many churches throughout the country. And when in this case, it was in Traverse City, it was in a church, but representatives of all religions were invited to a conference and to hear me. This is in the Houghton or Hancock. And for a few years, I was a keynote speaker at the courthouse on the Constitution Day. And students were invited. This was the Knights of Columbus. This was their evening banquet, and in the daytime, now I didn't touch anything. Oh. Okay. I just need to know where to put the finger.
Here.
Oh. Maybe with my right. Oh, yes. Each gathering is important, doesn't matter the size and location. But this one particular in Mississippi, Stennis Space Center, where they test all the rockets. It is almost a city by itself, yes. And this is Admiral Open, who got my book and gave me a plaque. And not here, but Bob and I were this Monday, today's Wednesday, 2 days ago, in a very powerful, also with a very powerful gathering, Northwestern University, Kellogg School of Management, where it was a gathering of international students. Not only was I honored to be invited to this highly prestigious school, but the important it was to be with people. And why do I know? They were each given a little pad. And when they left the note, instead a whole basket, they were throwing in the basket. On the way back, when Bob drove, I was reading those notes aloud, a full basket there. People from all over the world attend school at Northwestern in Chicago. And for some of them, it was an eye-opener, not knowing. Some of them knew very little of what went on with the Holocaust. And I find it also when we travel to very small communities, where we are welcomed like royalty with the newspaper splash, Irene is coming, because how important it is to reach communities that know so little about the Holocaust. So I welcome every time. Before the COVID, I was extremely booked up and busy and spoke. We would go for a week here, a week there, speaking one day in one community, from community to community. During the COVID, everything came to a halt. Little by little, things are picking up. But I'll be glad to be invited to your children's school, to your churches, to your clubs, and any other gathering that wants to learn from my experience. When I am in school, I take up to 2 hours and whatever more. And it is important because those are the young people who will be the future leaders of this country and beyond. And when I talk at Northwestern, I told them, you'll be the leaders of the world and the countries to which you return. And I tell them, and I will tell you too, it is important not just to know what happened, but how those things happen. In order to prevent such things from happening again, we need to understand how those things evolve. Monsters like Hitler don't come up suddenly on the scene. It's a very gradual process. And by the way, Hitler was democratically elected. Democracy is a very fragile condition. If you don't protect it, it dies from within. And it starts off with finding a group of people, attacking them, and dehumanizing, and repeating through over and over propaganda, making caricatures of human beings. And you repeat a lie or a distortion long enough, and people accept it as a fact, validity. And we have to be extremely attuned to such horrors and attuned to leaders who, through fear-mongering and distortion and personal interest, grow to become totalitarian monsters. And it is so important not to be bystanders when we see injustice happen, because those are beginnings of things. It is too late to take action when the monster grew to full capacity. The time to do it before it reaches that. I know I threw a lot of stuff at you, so gather your thoughts and ask me any questions you want. Yes,
Myself, I'm also Jewish and son. So I'm here basically to support you because I know what you're doing. And this is my mission, basically.
super, thank you. And you know, when I felt very honored and also very rewarded hearing the dean of the school of Kellogg School of Management stand up in the room while the question to express his deepest appreciation of me coming to tell my story and the message of hope. Yeah. Yes. Stand up, please, so everyone can hear you. Thank you.
So I guess my question for you would be like, because of the war, did you ever feel like you lost a part of yourself during that period? And if so, did you ever come to terms with that, moving forward? How was it?
Did I ever feel during the war that I lost a part of myself? How did I come to terms with this and go forward? You know, I was a very young child. A young child, all children have a desire to live. I never thought of myself in those terms that I lose a part of me. It was always a step forward. And I never thought the question, do I give up? Is it too difficult? No. If I am to think of as an adult what I lost, and when my book was published by the University of Michigan, and I was asked to, how did the Holocaust affect you? I had to take a moment to think of it, because, you know, whatever happens in our childhood affects us of who we become. We are a cumulative thing of what happens for our life. And my childhood being dominated by the Holocaust massacre. So if I think of what I lost now, and what I am most envious of people is an extended family. When it comes to joy and when it comes time of pain or celebration, you want to share it with those who knew you over the years of what we call the extended family. I don't have that. And that loss I felt all alone. But I have learned how to enjoy life in spite of the pain, to live with pain and to live with joy at the same time. Yes.
How were you able to fund all those, all the education that you had?
How I was able to do it?
How were you funded?
How I was funded? I came here, I was married, and we paid it ourselves. And at that time, the University of Cincinnati, where I have my 2 college degrees, and Xavier University, where state school was not expensive as my grandson, who right now attends Northwestern. Do I see a hand there of a little boy? You want to come closer and talk to me so you can ask me a question? Okay, that's close enough. Now tell me what you wanted to know.
How did you survive?
How did I survive? A little bit at a time. Just a little bit at a time. One day, 1 hour, and the next hour. How old are you? You were 5. You know, I was, when it started, I wasn't much older than you. Maybe 1 year, nothing the whole year. It was tough. Very tough. Did you have a cookie there? I never had cookies then. Never. I didn't have cookies. I didn't have enough bread. So you should be very happy whatever your mom prepares for food. Think of, there's so many little boys that go hungry, but we don't have any. What's your name? I didn't hear you.
Nephew.
Naheem.
Nahim, glad to meet you, Nahim. Thanks for your question. Now you can go back to your little brother and your mom. If you don't have any question, oh yes. I'm gonna stay here for as long as you have a question.
Sorry,
want
I
to
know
know.
you were very young, but did you see any advance warning that say your community was turning against you, who you thought you were friends were now animus towards you and your family? And on a more lighter note question, what was that lovely dog's name that was in the picture with you?
I will start with the lovely dog. That's a simpler answer. That dog was not mine. Somehow we were in the country, my mother or someone wanted me to take a picture of it. As a matter of fact, I was afraid of dogs. I never owned a dog. And I was holding it like that. Did I recognize of any hate of them coming? I was too young to know. I was just too young. You saw this little 19 boy? I wasn't much older than you. Yes, did I see you had a question? Yes, please.
So at one point you said that you didn't talk about it for many decades. Is that right?
Yes,
And then all of a sudden something happened and you started talking and going and giving presentations and places and educating people. What was the catalyst that changed that?
Okay. You know, when people go through traumatic experience, it takes some either a social climate to allow them to be vulnerable, or some personal powerful event with motive. In my case, it was a very, very personal, painful, private event. And you will read it in my book, that motivated me to write my book. And with the book, my book, it took a life of its own. I was telling this story and writing the book, I cried a lot. But then the book took on a life of its own. People who read it asked me to come. And I got so many invitations, and I realized it is my role now to use that for a positive purpose. Yes. And the book was published almost 10 years ago. And since then, little by little, it picked up tremendous. I started going throughout the country speaking. I never promoted myself or advertised anything. It was word of mouth. It was picking up. One librarian spread it on the interlibrary system in Michigan, and the next day I got from over. But if people ask me a few 100 miles, 500, 300 miles, I will go for more than one presentation because I need to use my time and energy efficiently. And what helps me is Bob is a magnificent partner in my attempt. He greatly believes in what I do, and he's there to help me in any way. And by now he has the title Director of Transportation and Logistics. And by now you know what are the logistics. But when we went to Chicago with all this construction here, construction there, he was very cheerful, very relaxed about it, and I was getting tense. And
So, can I ask another question?
that's okay, sure.
So 10 years ago, or 15, or whenever you really blossomed into this activist, did your sister have any sort of a similar?
My sister lived in Israel. My sister died about 2-3 years ago. And my sister and I were very different people, extremely very different. She was a wonderful human being, but very different and not as daring as I in any way, yes. So no, she did not have. Once I became a teenager, I was the older sister. Yes, the woman in green.
Yes. Have you considered or looked into the Shoah Foundation? and doing one of the hologramic?
Well,
Recordings?
first of all, I was interviewed by Spielberg.
Right.
Spielberg is called the oral history. I was interviewed by Spielberg, not Spielberg himself, but his team. And my history is in 5 places throughout the world. Yes. There is a movie about me, PBS written, Irene, Child of the Holocaust. That was a few years ago, but only a few months ago, a movie came out that first one, Irene, Child of the Holocaust, I didn't like it at all. I mean, how it was done. But a few months ago, a wonderful movie was also by PBS, and Shoah Ambassador. Shoah Ambassador. Shoah is another way of saying Holocaust. And it is not about me, but I am also in that movie. And a part of it was filmed in my home. And that uses 2 young artists, not Jewish, Detroiter, one a musician, and the other one is the artist that does glass and sculpture and so on. Using them to be the ambassadors of the Holocaust through their art. And what it tries to, it starts off from the premise of interviewing spontaneously some people, young people in a shopping center, so to find out how much they know about the Holocaust. And the interviewer surprised that so people know so little or some don't none. So this was an attempt to teaching young people about the Holocaust, but teaching them through other young people in it. It is wonderfully done. It had a showing about maybe 2 months ago, a premiere showing, yes. It won a number of national awards, and I don't know, little by little will be shown in different areas. When it comes into the community that you are there, it really should be seen. It is wonderfully done. It includes 5 Holocaust survivors, but we are not the focus. The focus are the 2 young people. One African-American man, 20-year-old or something, a wonderful young man. And here, about 22-year-old young woman, a sculptor with glass and so on. Yes.
Did you want me to stand up again or?
Yes, I do want you to stand up all the time you speak. I
Okay.
stand up too. So we are equal.
So I guess my big question for you is, because you kind of started, I mean, how do I put this? Like, you were thrown into this like chaotic situation at such a young age, like things were so challenging. And then like, moving on from that, like I'd imagine things were a little bit, moving to America, I'd imagine things might have been a little bit easier in terms of, acquiring resources and stuff like that. But like, I guess to kind of summarize the question, did you ever feel like life got easier as you got older? Because you lived for a long time. Did you ever
Yes,
feel like
and by the way, I still intend to live for a long time.
it's just,
Did life become easier? Of course life became easier. Life became easier, first of all, I'm not hungry. And I periodically will go to, not now, even sometimes I remember, I worked very hard. I had a very demanding job, but I would go sometimes shopping to a supermarket and I would stop for a moment. I said, can you imagine? I can buy any food I want to. And that notion of the plenty of being able to buy the food I want has been overwhelming for a long, long time. As you can see, I don't abuse. I still watch my waistline. But I appreciate the idea of that plenty that I can partake. At the same time, for me, hunger in the world, children's hunger, is the most intense, the most saddening and powerful thing. I do everything I can financially to help organizations that fight to alleviate hunger in the world. No child should ever be hungry in the world. When I see those starving African children, it breaks my heart. When I remember, you all are too young to remember the Biafra in Africa situation. You remember?
Yeah.
I remember my children were young and I sat down with them and we talked about of having no birthday gifts, no celebration days, that we need to do everything we can to help the Biafran children. I think that it's a crime to see a hungry child in the world. So I do appreciate that I am not hungry. I'm not poor. My feet are not frostbitten. And I have all the essential of living. And the most important thing for me right now are not tangible objects, but the people in my life. The people in my life are the most important thing. And my ability to carry my mission of tolerance, understanding, and reaching out to one another. I see the, yes.
Is there something we as adults could do maybe every day or every so often that would help us be more tolerant people? Is there something I can do to teach my children this tolerance?
Yeah, it starts off with teaching your children. And if I see your children are biracial, so you have a great opportunity to teach your children that their mom and their dad are equally loved. Doesn't matter what the color of their skin. And you start off with how you behave towards people around the world. And this is what we each can do, starting off with how with our daily action towards other human beings, and particularly to children, because no child is born with hate or anything else. They just acquire it in the process, and they acquire it through their families, through their surroundings, and so on. Hitler said that if you get them past 6, that is too late to indoctrinate in his belief, believing that whatever you do, it's the young child that gets the foundation. Yes. So as a mother, I see you have 2 children. You have a big job to teach them the right stuff.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
How many children? You have children,
I
grandchildren?
have children, yes. I have children. I have 3 children, but 2 of them live only in my heart. Yes.
Do you have any contact with any other Holocaust survivors? Do you
The
share
one
their
that funded with
stories?
Holocaust survivors. Until I wrote the book, I did not have any contact with any Holocaust. Since my book was published, yes, I joined the group. It started with, it was a group of meetings once a month in people's homes, just as a, shall we say, connecting with the parts of my life. But most of them right now, many of them died. And those who not have difficulty driving or where, so it's kind of a fell apart, not much. Yes.
I just want to say thank you for telling the story.
You're welcome.
You said you spoke at different cultures, and I just want.
I am sorry.
I said you spoke at different cultures. and
Yes.
whatnot. I just wanted to ask how your faith.
How, you mean how my religion helped me survive that? A religion was not a factor that helped me survive. That was not a factor. If anything, my humanity helped me. Yes.
Okay. Oh, it's okay, I have a lot of questions.
That's okay.
Yeah,
That's okay.
it's, you know, real big privilege to meet somebody such as yourself.
Thank you.
So I guess another question would be, I mean, because I was, yeah, okay, sorry, I love that stage right here.
That's okay. Start over.
So I guess one of my other questions for you would be like, because you kept a secret to yourself for a long, well, most to yourself, from my understanding, for a long, long time. And I think that's why I was asking you.
It wasn't a secret, I just didn't talk about it. It was easier, less painful to talk about it. Not that I intended to make it a secret. I just, you know, I didn't want to touch it. It was too painful. There was no reason to do it.
Well, and then I guess that raises a big question, like, because this is why I was curious if life got easier, because you had this painful memories of this event that unfolded. And you had this with you for such a long time untouched. What was it like not talking about that for so long? Did it bottle up? Did it grow? Did it fester? Did it manifest itself in different ways that you didn't realize?
I did not require any psychiatrist to help me with it. I did not feel that it was poking somewhere because I put it away. It was dormant. It means it didn't bother me and I didn't touch it. Yes. Could you remove your mask just for talking? Thank you.
When you moved to America, as an immigrant, did you find people were easily accepting of you, or did you find yourself facing some sort of discrimination? Was it easy to relate to others? How
did people receive me when I came as an immigrant? First of all, I came married to a man who was born in Detroit. That always helps that you were. And you know, when when I speak in high school and people ask, so how did you come to the United States? I tell them to begin with, I did something I don't recommend you do. And I'm not talking about coming to the United States. At the ripe age of 18, I married someone from Detroit and I came to the United States. I tell them I'm not against marriage, but I'm against 18. So anyway, so it helped me. Second, I was a very confident young woman. And I found ways, and I was kind of taking it a little with a sense of humor when people ask me, how do you like the United States? I would say to my husband, what a strange question, it's a big question, how do you like the United States? I would tell them something I do and something I don't. And that was my answer. How people felt about me, you know, I never gave it a thought. I never gave it a thought how they felt about it. I went through life, you know, I was professionally very daring, very bold, and someone would say, how did they feel? I said, when I remember I became director of mental health for Livingston County, a very reactionary county. And on the radio, when I spoke, a county commissioner came to the radio station woman and Mary, who said, your director, then Mary must be something damn wrong with your radio. Your director sounded like she had an accent. You know, and I felt people don't like my accent. That's their problem, not mine.
That's right.
So was never concerned, am I accepted well or not accepted? Yes.
Do you find that your experiences in life led to psychology development?
Yes. With my experience in life lead me to psychology, yes.
Anything in particular?
It was because after the Holocaust, I experienced kindness from people. Well, on one hand, I experienced a lot of pain, but also experienced kindness from people.
Well, it just sounds from what you've told us that you had a great caring, maybe even love at such a young age for people and diversity, learning the
Yes,
different
but you
languages
know,
and wanting.
what interests
education.
me in psychology, want to understand what makes people tick, what makes people act, how you can have such a range. You can have, you know, people who can show kindness, and you can have such a monstrosity. What is it? If you look at the little babies, they were all born such cute little things. And what happens in the process? What happens in the process that some become monsters and others are just caring human beings? It is not inborn. Certain pathologies could be inborn, but not the character of the person. So yes, psychology, that motivated me to go in psychology. And my son happens to be a psychologist too. And I asked my son, me being a Holocaust survivor, how did it affect me bringing up my children? And then my son said, I never had another mother to compare. So people sometimes ask me, do you think that this affected you because you were a Holocaust? How would it be different? I said, I never had another life to compare. You just go with the circumstances. You make certain assumptions what affected you what. But you know, those are just assumptions.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for coming. And again, I have, in my book is a way how to contact me. I have here a few business cards. I have business cards. I have few cards, and I have a few more, I think, in my purse. And if you know of a community that would like to invite me, and Bob and I travel all over the country. We would travel all over the world. I had none of the country. I almost ended up in one of the countries, but too complicated with the expenses. I expected them to pay. Yeah. So thank you all, and if you